Pavan Guru Pani Pita, Mata Tat Mahat. With these sacred words of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, I open the International Day for Biodiversity 2020. Our most respected and revered Shri Pradeep Krishan Ji, we all extend our warm welcome to you, sir. From today's keynote address, we eagerly look forward to your invaluable guidance for the restoration of our ecosystem. Shri Shubhendu Sharma Ji, advisor EcoSikh and founder director A4S, our friend, philosopher and guide, who has also obliged us by managing all the technical aspects of hosting this webinar. Thank you, sir. We all know that the UN's theme for today's celebration is Our Solutions Are in Nature. This resonates the words recited by Guru Nanak Dev Ji more than 500 years ago. Balyari Kudrat Vasya. Over the years, these words have been the guiding light at EcoSikh. Since our inception in 2009, in the presence of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and Prince Philip, EcoSikh has worked on creating awareness for global warming and for safeguarding our environment. During this decade, we worked on our strategic plan on biodiversity. Last year, EcoSikh started the restoration of our ecosystem by creating 145 Guru Nanak sacred forests and by training more than 350 forest makers under the able guidance of Sri Shubhendu Sharma Ji. All these forests are thriving with over 95% survival, showing amazing growth and providing a conducive environment for pollinators, insects, birds, microbes, and many small creatures who flourish. They have now found their lost habitat in these 160 square meter spaces. Finally, on behalf of Punjab Biodiversity Board and EcoSikh, I once again welcome our esteemed guests who have the collective muscle to restore the ecosystem of Punjab as well as the ecosystem of India. And now comes our big moment to hear Sri Pradeep Krishan Ji. He is the greatest authority on native forest species of central India. He has written the most referred books and he has huge achievements like Rao Jodha Park in Jodhpur, which is one of the best in the world. His keynote address today will pave the way for all of us to move towards the restoration of our ecosystem. And he will be joined in the deliberations by Shri Shubhendu Sharma Ji, who is the master of Miyawaki methodology and has pioneered it in India since 10 years. Let's give them a great round of virtual applause. Welcome, Shri Pradeep Krishan Ji.
Thank you very much indeed. What I intend to do today is to share as quickly as possible, give you a sense of the journey that I made starting around the year 2005 when I first began working in Jodhpur. Because that journey has many lessons, I think, that apply to anybody who's wanting to try and create biodiversity habitats, patches, landscapes, anywhere in this country at least. And then I'd like to field questions because very often when I talk like this, you say things that prompt questions and then there's no opportunity for questions to be answered. But I do want to just preface the story of my journey with one or two remarks. One is that, I remember reading some years ago that a British forester called Ronnie R.N. Parker, he wrote a book called The Flora of the Punjab with Hazara and Delhi. The book was written in the 1920s. He said that whenever the Punjab farmer was clearing land for agriculture in the forests of the Punjab, he always left a tiny bit of original natural flora, not just trees, but the grasses, the shrubs. And his stated reason was always that we want to leave something for the birds and the bees. Otherwise, where will they go? And today we find, I don't know Punjab intimately, but we find, at least from reports, that Punjab is now, unfortunately, the leader in pesticides. You are in real danger of losing your insects. Day before yesterday was World Bee Day. And people say that if we lose our bees, you know, that's the end, because they're the biggest pollinators and the most efficient pollinators we have. And there are situations in America where you hear of bees being trucked from Florida to California to the orange fields because they've lost their bees in California. So there are very, very dire consequences of losing our insects. So I'm really, really delighted to learn and to understand the work that the EcoSikh community is doing in this regard. I congratulate them and I applaud them for doing this, because also the fact that this is being done with devotion, with a spirit of seva, means that you will achieve much more than any government can do. I'm convinced of that. All right, I'm going to share my screen with you and I'm going to talk through some of the pictures I have assembled here. This is the Mehrangarh Fort. Those of you who have visited Jodhpur will no doubt have seen this. And I was taken to the edge of the fort in 2005 by somebody who was the CEO of the trust that manages the fort. The fort is a museum, right? And he said, can you green the land that adjoins the fort? And the land was basically consisted of a volcanic rock, a rock called rhyolite, which is very crystalline, very hard, hardly has any soil in, even in the cracks. And in these three pictures that you can see, you'll also notice that the entire land was covered by what we call Vilaiti Kikar, Prosopis juliflora. And what had happened was that sometime in the 1930s, somebody went to Maharaja Umed Singh and they said, "Sahab, aapko agar apni desert kingdom ko hara bhara rakhna hai, तो ये एक मैजिकल प्लांट है मेक्सिको का, साउथ अमेरिका का, इसके सीड्स आप मंगा दीजिए." And Maharaj Umed Singh used to fly his own airplane, and he ordered thousands of bags of seeds of Prosopis juliflora, and he broadcast them throughout his kingdom, which was much larger than the district of Jodhpur is. In those days, the kingdom of Jodhpur extended all the way to what is now the boundary with Gujarat. So the area within the city wall, which you see on the top here on the horizon, the entire area between the city wall and the fort is an area of something like 70 hectares. And it was chock-a-block covered with this Vilaiti Kikar, which has become a scourge especially in northern India and western India. And when I was taken to this area and I was told, can you green this area for us? My question was, what exactly do you mean when you say green this area? Because there are various ways of greening an area. This is one way. I mean, it is green, right? So the CEO tried to explain to me, and he said, well, we just want it to be like a pleasant adjunct to the fort and to look nice. And I said, yes, but, do you want to keep the Vilaiti Kikar? And he said, no, we want to get rid of the Vilaiti Kikar. They call it the Bavliya there. The Marwadi name for the Vilaiti Kikar is Bavliya. नहीं, इसको तो हम हटाना चाहते हैं. तो मैंने कहा, अगर आप, if you want fields of lawn and, flowering ornamental trees, are you prepared to bring in several million tons of soil, literally, several million tons of soil, because ये उबड़ खाबड़ ज़मीन है, सवार ज़मीन भी नहीं है. And then are you prepared to water the plants every single day, or in a desert with an annual rainfall of about 250 millimeters, Are you prepared to water every single plant for the rest of your lives? And he said, well, when you put it like that, obviously we don't. So he said, well, what is possible here? And quite frankly, I had no experience at that point of working in the desert. I'd done a little bit of natural rewilding with native plants in Uttarakhand and in Madhya Pradesh, but I hadn't worked in the desert. And I said, look, the way forward, as far as I'm concerned, is that you have to try and imitate nature, and you have to try and restore the natural native ecology of rocky parts of the Thar Desert. So he looked a bit puzzled and he said, yeah, but we don't understand what that will mean. So I wrote him a quick 1.5 page summary of what it would involve, how we would need to go out into the desert and look for these rocky outcrops, because most of the desert is sandy, and what remains of these rocky rhyolite outcrops is, maybe 10-12% of the Thar Desert. And what I got from the trust was, they said, look, show us what you can do in 3 years, and then we'll take a bigger decision about this. So we started working on this plot, and we did a lot of learning on the way. And one of the great things about this plot was that we're not only looking at trees, and one of the big messages I want to give to the EcoSikh community is, please don't restrict yourselves to thinking only about trees. Trees are only part of a habitat, part of a landscape, right? We'll talk about this more. Maybe Shubhendu can raise this question later. This is what, there's one area about 20 hectares towards the west of the fort. This is what it looked like after we had managed to remove the Vilayati Kikar. The area had been planted up. We basically took the decision that Vilayati Kikar had shown us the places where it was possible for plants to grow. They had done all the field work, all the research. और जहाँ से विलायती कीकर निकाला, उसी पिट में हमने फिर नई चीज डाली. But the trouble was that we were getting something like 60-65% survival rates, and we weren't quite sure what we were doing wrong or what we were doing right. And we realized that we didn't have sufficient information. And here, can I just address the people in the biodiversity boards? See, what's happened in India historically, and it's continuing to happen today, is that we tend to segregate plants and insects and mammals and geology and soil and water. So you don't actually build up ecological links. So for example, for Marwar, there was a brilliant book by Dr. M.M. Bhandari on the flora of the Thar Desert. So we had information about all the plants arranged phylogenetically, which means that family-wise, according to the how people thought they had evolved. But there was no ecological information. There was no information that related the plants to, let us say, the quality of the soil that it grew in, or the kind of moisture regime that it needed, or the minerals that are needed in the soil. There was absolutely no information available. So we had to learn from scratch. Now, I'm not going to labor this point now, but it's a very, very important point, because I believe that as you go forward, as the EcoSikh, this wonderful initiative goes forward, one of the things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to pay very close attention to the quality of your soil, the minerals it contains, the subsurface geology, and the moisture regime, because it's not all the same. I don't know Punjab well enough, but I do know that Punjab has areas of desert, it has areas of limestone, areas of sandstone. In the hills, you'll get all kinds of granites and quartzites and other, alluvial areas. So they're all very different. And trees are adapted, most trees are adapted to fairly specific kinds of habitats. And the secret of doing well when you're planting up a habitat is to plant the right thing in the right place. And what we've learned in Rajodha Park was that if we saw a plant that wasn't doing well, we said, well, this plant has to die. It has to go out, and it has to be replaced by something else that will survive better in this particular spot. So it's taken us all this time. This is a picture of Rajodha Park in 2018, but there was a moment around 2017-18 when all these separate trees and bushes, suddenly the canopies joined up and it became a forest. And this is in immensely forbidding, harsh conditions of very little moisture, very little soil. So it was a very, very heartening moment for us. And one of the things I intend to do over the next, I've now retired from all my landscape work, but what I do intend to do over the next few years is to write about things like this, to describe the journey we made, to talk about the mistakes we made and the lessons we learned, because then it allows people who are doing this work in future, not to need to reinvent the wheel. They can move on from where we've done it, right? This is a photograph of our visitor center, which is a small half-an-acre place. Again, very little soil, but we used, apart from the neem leaves that are dropping down from the top, every single plant here is native to the desert. And it just shows you how, how beautiful it is when you have plants which are perfectly adapted to those conditions. वो जिस तरह से फलते फूलते हैं, the way they actually just do so beautifully and look so right in their environment. This is what we need to try and achieve, wherever we are doing it. I remember going to Jaipur to look at the new biological park that they'd made in the Nahargarh Hills. And in between these large enclosures for animals, they'd made little municipal parks. And they looked so out of place. They looked so wrong. These were being done by horticultural, municipal horticultural establishments in Jaipur. And I thought, my God, they've come to Nahargarh, which is like it's like an example of how things grow so beautifully in their natural environment. And they've brought in these silly little ornamental things that now need to be watered and given card and looked after in a way that is completely unsustainable. So the word sustainable is absolutely key. Now in a sense, we've lost the resonance of sustainable. But what sustainable means is that, look, when you have large areas, now this is 70 hectares, हमारे लिए बहुत बड़ा लगा, but the central ridge in Delhi near where I live is 900 hectares. It's 9 square kilometers. And when foresters planted it up, in 1914, 1915, soon after Delhi became the capital, they planted all the wrong species, and then they withdrew the watering and they said, "Arey, yahan tak kuch survive nahi kiya," which is not surprising. See, this is the trouble. We don't know how to understand what different landscapes require. And it's most important that we do this. So other than preparing biodiversity registers, which you are doing in the biodiversity boards, and it's very important you do it, please think of cross linkages. Please think of the ways in which everything is connected, because everything is connected. We now know that trees almost literally talk to each other through mycorrhizal networks underground, and a lot of that depends on things like, fungal networks and the soil quality and things like that. Now, I just want to give you another little perspective of this is the area. This relates to the previous picture. Actually, this is what the area looked like before we made this park, right? So you can actually transform what looks like completely banjar, rocky, dry places just by using the right things. And these are not excessively watered or anything like that. The next thing I want to get into is when we used to travel in Western Rajasthan looking for plants to collect seeds, we often saw plants in situ in their own environments, in their own ecologies, that we would have loved to have in our park, but we didn't have the right soil or didn't have the right geology. And sometimes you would even zabardasti try and bring in a plant, grow it in our nursery, and then try it in the park, and it wouldn't survive. And then we decided that, look, what we can do perhaps is to create these, pot-like structures. These are all basically raised beds, right? And this is the back, this became the parking lot. This was intended to be the parking lot of the park. And then we said, because the parking lot was not used a lot, we said, let's convert it into a museum of all the special soils that you get in the Thar Desert. Maybe not all the special soils, but certainly some of the most important and interesting ones. So each little raised bed was converted into a holder for a special soil in which special plants were adapted to growing in, right? Sometimes we had to dig below ground. So some of these pots are about 6 or 7 feet tall, because in the desert, lots of plants invest a lot of their energy into growing very, very deep roots. So there's no point having a 3-foot pot for a plant that has a 7-foot root, right? But we had an enormously satisfying time, literally just collecting supposing we wanted a particular plant, we would go under the plant and we'd collect the seed-bearing soil, just maybe 2 inches of soil from the top. And we'd put that soil into a empty cement katta. और उसके अलावा हम इसके soil को collect करने के बाद we'd fill it into the pot, put the katta on top and wait for the rains. And this is the result we had in our first year. This is not after 3 or 4 years of work, right? So this is just another close-up picture of how these plants just were so happy because they had their soil, their minerals, and their moisture regime, right? Now, for the last 3 years, I've been working on a government project, and it's the first time I've actually worked with government, and in some ways, I've regretted it. My apologies to anybody in the government there, but it's been a very difficult thing because one thing I found was that, from being treated as a professional in the other work I've been done, suddenly you're treated like a contractor. But we were shown this area. This is a picture of Jaipur city. You can see the city all around. And the hilly area you see in the center and in the north of the picture is a hill system called Nahargarh. And the red, not circle, but the whatever you call it, shows you some dunes, some sand that basically has been blown in from the west with monsoon winds and collected at the bottom of Nahargarh. So it looked something like this in 2016 when I was first shown this land. And if you look at it from the air, it's like this. So it's a little bit like the Chambal ravines, right? You've got these basically deep sand. It's not alluvium, it's sand, whereas it's in the Chambal, it is alluvium. Heavily eroded. You can see all the little paths made by goats and cattle and buffaloes and donkeys because this area was free for all. And what we did here was we proposed to the JDA, the Jaipur Development Authority, that we said, look, can we try and restore the natural ecology of a sand dune, of a set of sand dunes? And they said, what is your vision? What is your idea? And I said, look, we've been looking at the Thar Desert for several years now. And what we've realized is that the natural ecology of the Thar Desert is not a forest, right? But there in the sand dunes, you get what are called shrublands. The sort of climax kind of vegetation in these dunes are grasses and shrubs that seldom grow more than the height of a man's shoulder. But these are the things that have over millions of years evolved to be completely comfortable. And this is now becoming extremely endangered in the Thar Desert because basically, you have invasive plants coming in, you have more and more agriculture happening in the Thar, there are more and more places that are cleared, one way or the other. Even the forest department that is now trying to create habitats for the bustard is clearing this and planting only savan grass under the mistaken impression that only savan grass is what the bustards need. So we said, can we create, and sorry, one aside is that when we first started seeing these habitats in the Thar, we said, what do you call these habitats? We were asking local people, Marwari mein kya bolte hain isko? So unke samajh mein nahi aaya. They said, Sab, we don't know what you're asking. So we said, for example, if your camel goes into an area like this, do you have a name? Do you have a kind of generic? And they would give us geographic names. And I said, no, we're not asking for the place name. And finally we met a man, he said, हाँ साहब इसको हम रोई बोलते हैं. So we were very thrilled. We said, दोबारा बोलो. He said, रोई बोलते हैं आप इसको. And we realized that Rohi, we looked it up on Google Auntie, and Google Auntie told us that there's only one answer on Google Auntie, that James Todd, traveling from Sindh to Jaisalmer in 1829, says the natural jungle of the desert is the Rohi. And the Rohi changes as the minerals change. So if you move from a limestone habitat to a sandstone habitat or to a rhyolite habitat, the plants will change, but it has a natural jungle that is perfectly adapted to growing. And they're all shrubs, basically, except in the hard interdune areas. And we realized that one of the things we could do with this land in Jaipur was to make a museum of the Rohi and to try and introduce the word Rohi into the vocabulary that people use when they talk and think about the desert and visit the desert. And we realized that all over the world, you have the garrigue in Spain, you have the mulga in Australia, you have the chaparral in California, you have the fynbos in South Africa. These are all shrublands that are celebrated, loved, and very carefully conserved. But this, the Roi, it's treated as wasteland. The forest department officially says it's a wasteland. There is no conservation, whatever. So we have a huge role to play. I mean, people who are outside government in trying to sensitize government and saying, look, come aboard, understand these things. This is another example of what a Roi habitat looks like and how beautiful it is, and how many animals, from reptiles to mammals, actually live in these lands and prosper. This is another kind of Roi dominated by one particular plant called Phog. They call it Phog in Marwar. I'm sure you get Phog in Ganganagar area and in southern Punjab, but I haven't been there. I don't know that area. Now, one of the things we tried to do, the question was, how do we do it? How do we try and recreate a Roi in Jaipur? What we did was, we would go to the habitat that we wanted. We'd collect some Uparwala seed-bearing soil. We put it into cement kattas. We give them color-coded symbols, and we brought in some trucks of soil and we started planting them. And literally by scattering this soil that contained the seeds, not only of the target plant that we wanted, but the entire community of plants that live together and that are, that live together and cooperate together, plus the plants were getting their minerals. And we had fantastic results. So this was a viewing deck that we made in the park using Thar architecture, to bring people there and to make them understand what the Roi was all about. This is a picture we took in the last rains, where we're seeing some of the results of what was happening, and a more distant picture with some of here again we tried those, the raised beds and all the special plants that you can see in these little holders that you see in this area. Now you see, coming back to what I was saying, am I taking too long, Shubhendu? Do I need to cut
That's okay, sir. Please, you have time.
Coming back to what I was saying about different kinds of landscapes, this is just a little quick lot of pictures that show you the huge variation and diversity of landscapes that you get even in Western Rajasthan. You've got salt-laden areas, you've got clayey areas, you've got ferruginous sand, you've got obstruction dunes, you've got rhyolite, you've got quartzite, it's just amazing. And Punjab will have nothing less than this, if not more, because you actually have the foothills of the Himalaya. So I want to just come back to this point that, when the EcoSikhs are beginning to spread their wings and think of doing specific things, don't just carry with you a single, list of plants of the Punjab or trees of the Punjab. That's not going to be good enough. You actually have to match your plants to the specific conditions that you get there. This, for example, is a tree that I'm very, very fond of. It's a very rare tree in Rajasthan. They call it Indrok. And Indrok is only found in what are called nadis. Nadis are seasonal watercourses in lime kankar. And it'll only grow in lime kankar. And it actually forms clonal forests, which means that all of these trees are not actually separate trees. They're all the same tree. And they're all linked by runners underground. So they're one giant organism that is adapted to growing in very, very difficult conditions. And we get that with the dhok, or the dhaw, for example, with Anogenesis pendula all along the Aravalis. So it's, you've got lots and lots of wonderful opportunities to explore. Sorry, I've just got 5 minutes more to go. The point I was making about not just trees. This is the grass that I was talking about, Shubhendu, earlier, about Oropitium. Oropitium is called the rock grass. And we discovered when we were doing Jodhpur that this is actually a grass that colonizes rock, which means that once you get some little bit of soil blowing into crevices on rock, or little depressions like this, you get Oropitium seeds coming in and beginning to hold the soil. and it has a relationship with liverworts. And the liverworts and the oripitium together become something that binds the soil and keeps it there. Otherwise, it would blow away easily. And this is what allows other plants then to use this as a substrate on which to grow. So the secret, I mean, if you were, Rajudha Park would have just been bare rock and little pockets of soil, but for this grass. So it's very, very important that when you're exploring and when you're looking at what to do in different gurdwaras and different parts of the Punjab, that we explore possibilities like this and use all the resources. This is another example of a flat rocky area that is completely being covered with oripitium, on which other things are growing. Now, the last thing I want to show you is just that, what are you going to do in your gurdwaras? How are you going to, what kind of design principles are you going to use perhaps? And I don't want to tell you what to do, but I want to just spark some ideas. This is an example of a palace in Nagaur that had, these rectangular formal charbagh ke, parterres. And I was asked in 2015 whether I would plant in this area. And I said, look, this is not what I do. I don't do ornamental planting at all. And they said, no, but we want you to do it. And I said, I'll do it if you allow me to plant native desert plants that are perfectly adapted to this soil and this region. And they said, well, you can do that if you promise us that your desert plants will flower in February when we have our Sufi festival. And I said, I can't do that. Desert plants don't listen to to things like that. So finally, what we did was the center plot we developed like this. Now this is Phog. We went to the edge of the desert near the Pakistan border. And we brought in seed-bearing soil that belonged to the Phog plant, and look how beautiful it is. Now this is something completely wild looking, but they also wanted more formal plantings. So then we also said, okay, we can use desert plants in formal arrangements, right? So every single plant that you see here is actually a desert plant, but used in a formal arrangement. So even this is possible in your gurdwara. You can do it formally, but don't do dense woodlands. Try and imitate the way trees and plants work in nature. That's the end of what I want to say, but if Shubhendra wants to ask me other things, then I'm very happy to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pradeep ji, for sharing all that knowledge with us. We want to know a few things about history and how we have changed our point of view. One is that जैसे पुराने जितने भी botanical gardens होते थे उसमें दुनिया भर के species लाके हम लगा देते थे और बड़े खुश होते थे ये सोच के कि भाई यहाँ पे बाओबाब भी लगा है और साउथ अफ्रीका के पौधे भी हैं। आज भी इस तरह की सोच कुछ ऐसा हम लोग समझते हैं कि इंडिया जैसा आप और हम सब बात करते हैं कि लगभग 2500 पेड़ों की प्रजातियां हैं हमारे देश में। So is it right for us to run behind a number कि जितना ज्यादा डाइवर्स हो जाए उतना अच्छा है, या फिर हमारे पास दूसरे टारगेट होने चाहिए? Should we have smaller targets, more local targets? And for a place like Punjab, how many species of trees do you think should be an appropriate number that we should target कि भाई इतने species लग गए पंजाब के native, तब हम कह सकते हैं कि at least tree की diversity तो वापस आ गई है।
देखो शुभेंद्र, जितने अलग अलग इलाके हैं ना, they all should have their own little list of suitable species. To think of Punjab as one block is not a good idea, So you actually need to break up Punjab into 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 जितने भी ecological units हैं, and say if we're going to plant in a lime conquer soil, then this is the list of trees, this is the list of shrubs, this is the list of grasses, forbs that we require, and that becomes like like an exemplar, right? If you go to a sandy area that is basically quartzitic sand, right, that will have its own. And so one of the things when I advise younger people who are now setting out to do rewilding projects, and I'm very happy to see that not in huge numbers, but 8-10 लोग को मैं जानता हूँ, who are all now set off on this mission. they say, what do we do? And I say, look, the first thing you have to do is you have to find a good natural example. So supposing somebody invites you to work on a farm near Jaipur, तो आसपास जाओ और ऐसी जगह ढूंढो that has the same soil, same minerals, climate तो होगा ही उसी तरह का, and see what is happening in nature. What are the associations you find, right? And try and imitate that. But also look at the way things are spaced apart. For example, there are certain plants in the desert in the Thar where resources are at a great premium, but things are very spaced far apart because that's the way in which resources are shared. If you had them too close to each other, they wouldn't survive. So you have to also imitate the ways in which forests look and work. I've noticed that places in Delhi, there's a gentleman called C.R. Babu, Dr. C.R. Babu, who's worked on one of the Aravali biodiversity parks. He creates dense woodlands in Delhi when that is not the natural ecological type, right? For a thorn forest, you know. The British made mistakes when they were planting up Delhi, again, by not understanding. So the thing is, you can and you must strive for aesthetic effects, because that is part of the, that is a part of the human brain, that we strive for beauty. But that beauty shouldn't be in the form of, yaar ek pink flower laate hain, Brazil se ya Australia se. But I'll give you an example of the kind of aesthetic effects that you could strive for. When I was studying the natural forests of Madhya Pradesh, which is a huge area. I mean, I wasn't looking at the political boundaries of Madhya Pradesh, but I was looking at a particular ecological area whose size was the same as the size of France. Huge area. And I did this for 3 years. I traveled every single month for 3 years, different seasons, looking at things. And what started to thrill me most was going out in spring, just when trees are beginning new leaf. And one thing puzzled me. I know why trees are deciduous, because basically they're shutting down at a time when it's been 4 or 5 months since the last rains, right? They need to conserve their energy, conserve their water resources. They need to become dormant, so they shed their leaves. But then you would expect them to come into new leaf when the monsoons come, when the rains. But that's not what's happening. They're coming into new leaf in April, in May, 2 or 3 months before the leaf. And in most cases, the new leaf is in some part of the red spectrum, right? And I thought, my God, how beautiful. Why are landscape people, why are landscape architects not honing in on this and saying, when we do a park in Delhi or when we do an avenue, we'll use the reds to create these beautiful effects just by using the right trees, I was very, the reason why leaves come early is another long story, but the reds is a very interesting story. People used to think that, people wonder, why are they all red? We know that in temperate countries, in Canada, for example, the maple becomes red as it's about to be shed. What actually is happening is that the leaf has all these pigments, the reds and the browns and the yellows, and they are masked by green chlorophyll. So as long as there's chlorophyll in the leaf, you won't see the pigments. When a leaf is falling in a temperate forest, the chlorophyll is withdrawn, thereby unmasking the other colors. That's why you see the reds, right? Yahan ulta ho raha hai. Yahan the chlorophyll is not coming into the leaf. That's why you're seeing the reds. And naturally, scientists were asking, well, why do trees do this? Is it that they can delay the moment when the leaf becomes palatable to browsers because they're trying to protect themselves? Is it because the red is like a sunblock, at a hot time of the year? And then they discovered a fascinating reason. And I love this reason. They discovered that insects don't see in the long wavelengths. Insects do not see anything that is in the red part of the spectrum. And therefore, anything that is red is invisible to the greatest predator of a tree, which are the beetles. Nature never does anything randomly and for no reason. So yeah, so I just want to say that, I think that Gurdwaras don't do the same thing everywhere. To make each one unique, each one special. And I think you can do a fabulous job.
Pradeep ji, thank you so much for sharing such great insights.